The night was thick with summer heat, and the guest room I was staying in felt like a furnace. I had tossed and turned for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling, restless. My name is Ethan, and I was spending a few weeks at my cousin Ryan's house while my apartment underwent renovations. Ryan and I had grown up together. But as we got older, we became more like distant relatives who only saw each other at family gatherings. Ryan was a golden boy, athletic, confident, effortlessly charming. He had a girlfriend, Ava, a beautiful, sweet girl who adored him. He never had trouble getting women's attention. I, on the other hand, had always known I liked men, and I had always been attracted to him. It was stupid and dangerous, but undeniable. I sighed and rolled out of bed, deciding that maybe grabbing some water would help me settle. The house was dark and quiet, the only sound the hum of the air conditioner. As I passed Ryan's room, I noticed his door was ajar, the dim glow of the bedside lamp spilling into the hallway. I hesitated. Something about that sliver of light drew me in. It was late, too late for him to be awake. Maybe he fell asleep with the TV on. I wasn't sure why I did it, but I found myself stepping closer, pushing the door open just an inch more, and that's when I saw him. Ryan was sprawled across the bed, lying on his back, shirtless, a light sheet tangled around his legs. His toned chest rose and fell in deep, even breaths. But it wasn't just that. His boxers were loose, pushed down just enough to reveal the part of him I had never meant to see. My breath caught in my throat. I should have left. I should have turned around and shut the door, pretended I saw nothing. But I didn't. I stared, my heart hammering against my ribs. He looked different like this, unguarded, vulnerable, nothing like the cocky, untouchable Ryan I had grown up knowing. My pulse was thick in my ears, drowning out every logical thought. The air between us felt heavy, even though he was still deep in sleep. My body was frozen, my mind at war with itself. I wanted to leave. I wanted to stay. I wanted to touch. Ryan shifted slightly, a small sound escaping his lips. My stomach clenched. Was he dreaming? A part of me, one I hated to admit existed, wondered what he was dreaming about. His brows furrowed, his lips parting just slightly. Another breath, another shift. My legs felt like they were rooted to the ground, my fingers curling into fists at my sides. This was wrong. So, why did it feel like a test I wasn't sure I wanted to pass? I swallowed hard and took a single step back. The movement felt like breaking a spell. I turned, forcing myself toward the door. One last glance, and then I was gone, heart pounding as I shut myself into my room. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen to find Ryan standing by the counter, sipping coffee, his messy hair proof that he'd just rolled out of bed. He looked up at me, his gaze lingering for half a second too long. "Didn't hear you coming last night," he said casually. I nearly choked on my own breath. Did he know? Did he wake up? I forced a laugh. "Yeah, I was just getting some water." Ryan smirked, scratching the back of his neck. Man, I was out cold. Must have been exhausted. I nodded, avoiding his eyes. My skin felt hot, as if the moment from last night had branded itself onto me. I could still see it, still feel the weight of it in the air between us. Ryan stretched, his toned arms flexing as he let out a slow yawn. His boxer sat dangerously low on his hips, and I hated that my gaze flickered down before I could stop myself. I looked away too late. Ryan noticed. He didn't say anything, just held my gaze for a second longer than necessary. Something flickered in his expression. Something I couldn't name. Then, just like that, it was gone. "So," he said, pouring himself another cup of coffee, "you see anyone these days?" The question caught me off guard. Ryan had never asked about my dating life before. In fact, he never really acknowledged that I was gay unless someone else brought it up first. "No," I said carefully. "Ah," he mused. "Guess it's hard finding the right guy." I felt my pulse jump at the way he said it. Not in a mocking way. Not in the way straight guys sometimes joked about things they didn't understand. There was curiosity in his tone. "I guess," I replied, watching him closely. Ryan nodded, taking a slow sip of his coffee before flashing me that easy, confident smirk. "Well, I'm sure there's someone out there who's been checking you out. He knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not exactly what happened last night. But he knew something. And by the way his lips curved just slightly around the rim of his mug, he wasn't entirely innocent either. That moment changed something between us. It was the beginning of a slow, dangerous unraveling. One neither of us was ready to stop. The shift between Ryan and me was subtle at first. Just a change in the air, a new kind of tension stretching between us like a rubber band pulled too tight. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, if my own desires were painting something that wasn't really there. But then Ryan started acting differently. It was in the way he lingered a little too long when we passed each other in the hallway. The way his knee bumped mine under the table at dinner, and he didn't move it right away. The way he'd catch me looking, and instead of pulling back, he'd smirk. And then one night, he tested me. It was late again, and we were in the living room half watching a movie. Ryan was lounging on the couch, one arm draped lazily over the back, legs stretched out. I was in the armchair, too aware of him, of the way his shirt clung to his chest, of the way his shorts rolled up when he shifted. "You're quiet tonight," Ryan said, tilting his head toward me. I shrugged, just tired. He hummed, then smirked. "Or maybe you're avoiding me." I froze for half a second before forcing a laugh. "Why would I be avoiding you?" Ryan didn't answer right away. He stretched his arms over his head, his shirt lifting just slightly, exposing the toned muscles of his stomach. I knew what he was doing. And worse, I knew that he knew. I swallowed hard. I wasn't playing this game. "Relax," Ryan chuckled, voice low. "I'm just messing with you." I exhaled, shaking my head. "You're an ass." Ryan grinned. "Yeah, but you like it." The words hung between us, too heavy to be brushed aside as just another joke. My stomach tightened. This was it, the test. Ryan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, eyes locked on mine. "Come sit over here," he said, patting the empty space beside him. My pulse kicked up, but I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. "Why?" He smirked. "Because we're watching a movie, and you're sitting all the way over there like a weirdo." I hesitated. Everything in me told me not to do it. But another part of me, the reckless, desperate part, stood up before I could think better of it. I sat down, not too close, but not far enough either. Ryan didn't look at me at first. He just stretched his arm out along the back of the couch, barely grazing my shoulders. It was nothing, but it was everything. The movie played on, but I wasn't paying attention. Every nerve in my body was tuned into him, to the way he shifted just slightly, his thigh brushing against mine. He didn't move away. Neither did I. Then, after a long moment, he spoke. "You ever had a thing for a straight guy before?" The question sent a shockwave through me. My mouth went dry. I turned to look at him, searching his face for what this was. A joke? A trap? Ryan's expression was unreadable, but there was something behind his eyes. A flicker of curiosity. A challenge. "I don't go after straight guys," I said, my voice even. Ryan smirked. "Good answer." Silence settled between us, thick and heavy. The tension had coiled too tight, stretching between us, daring one of us to snap. And then Ryan did something that shattered whatever line we were pretending still existed. He shifted, turning toward me slightly. "You ever wonder about me?" he asked, voice lower now, rougher. My throat tightened. This wasn't just a game anymore. I could lie. I could laugh it off. I could walk away. Or I could tell the truth. I held his gaze. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan's jaw twitched. His fingers flexed against the couch cushion. He was fighting something. I could see it, feel it. Then, suddenly, he let out a breath and leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "Shit," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. The moment teetered on the edge, one push away from something neither of us could take back. I swallowed. Ryan. But before I could say another word, he was standing up. "I need a drink," he said quickly, heading toward the kitchen. I watched him go, my chest tight, my body thrumming with frustration that felt almost unbearable. He wanted it. I knew he did, but he was still running. and I wasn't sure how much longer I could let him. The thing about crossing a line is that once you do, there's no going back. No pretending it didn't happen. No convincing yourself it was nothing. And Ryan, he wasn't backing down anymore. It started the next night. I was in my room, lying in bed, my body restless, my thoughts tangled in him, his voice, his smirk, the way he looked at me like he was daring me to push him further. Then there was a knock at my door. Soft, hesitant, my stomach clenched. I sat up, forcing my voice to sound normal. Yeah. The door cracked open, and there he was, Ryan, standing in the dim hallway, his eyes shadowed with something unreadable. "Hey," he said quietly. I swallowed, gripping the sheets. "Hey." He didn't move, just stood there, fingers flexing at his sides like he was fighting the urge to do something reckless. Then, finally, he stepped inside and shut the door. I should have said something. Asked him what the hell he was doing here, why he looked like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. But I didn't, because I already knew. He crossed the room in 3 slow steps, stopping right in front of me. For a second, neither of us moved. And then, quietly, like a confession he wasn't ready to say out loud, he murmured, "I don't know what I'm doing." I exhaled, my pulse hammering. "Yeah, you do." Ryan's jaw clenched, his hands fisted at his sides. His breathing was uneven, like he was about to fight me or himself. I didn't reach for him. I didn't move. I let him decide. And when he did, it was with a desperation that stole the air from my lungs. His mouth crashed against mine, hot, rough, demanding. His hands gripped my face, fingers pressing into my skin like he was trying to convince himself I was real. And I kissed him back, because how could I not? This was Ryan, untouchable, cocky, straight Ryan, the guy who had spent his whole life pretending he wasn't capable of this. But now, he wasn't pretending anymore. He pushed me back onto the bed, his body covering mine, and everything was heat and reckless hunger. His hands roamed, hesitant at first, then bolder. Every touch, every movement was him testing himself, seeing how far he could let this go. I pulled back just enough to catch my breath. "You sure about this?" Ryan's eyes burned into mine. He was panting, his body tense like a live wire. "No," he admitted, "but I don't care." And that was all I needed to hear. That night, we didn't sleep. We didn't talk about it either. But the next morning, when I woke up tangled in him, his breath warm against my shoulder, the weight of what we had done settled in my chest like a secret too heavy to hold. Then his phone rang. I watched as Ryan groggily reached for it, blinking at the screen before answering. "Hey, babe," he murmured, voice still thick with sleep. Ava, his girlfriend. The reminder was a slap to the face. I sat up, heart pounding, as he kept talking, his voice casual, like nothing had happened, like I wasn't still lying in his bed, wearing his touch on my skin. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a mistake. It was an affair, and I had just become the secret he would never admit out loud. Ryan didn't leave right after the call. He stayed in bed, stretched out beside me, scrolling through his phone like nothing had changed, like I wasn't still there, listening to every breath, feeling the heat of his body lingering on mine, like I wasn't breaking apart from the inside out. I got up first, pulled on my clothes in silence, waited for him to say something. Anything. He didn't. He just lay there, one arm thrown over his face, his chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. I clenched my fists. "You should go shower before she FaceTimes you." Ryan flinched barely, but it was enough. His jaw tensed. He knew I was pissed. "She's not going to FaceTime me," he muttered. But he sat up anyway, running a hand through his hair. I folded my arms. "Right, because you've got this all figured out, huh?" Ryan finally looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw guilt in his eyes. He knew this wasn't fair. He just didn't care enough to stop. "Ethan," his voice was softer now. "Careful." I hated it. I shook my head. "Don't. You don't get to act like this is normal. Like this," I gestured between us, "isn't completely fucked." Ryan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know." I waited for more, for him to say what I needed to hear. That this wasn't just sex. That it meant something. But he didn't. Instead, He stood up, stretched, and said, "I should shower." That was it. And that's when I knew I wasn't just a secret. I was his mistake. The next few days were a torture I couldn't escape. Ryan acted like nothing had happened. He still smirked at me across the dinner table, still cracked stupid jokes, still lounged on the couch with his legs stretched out like he owned the place. But at night, he'd find me, and I let him. Every time he knocked on my door, every time he slid into my bed with that same mix of guilt and hunger, I let him. Because even though I knew what we were doing was wrong, even though I knew I was just a temporary thrill, I couldn't bring myself to stop. Until the night Ava showed up. I was in the kitchen, staring into the fridge, trying to convince myself I wasn't waiting for Ryan to come find me again, when I heard the front door open. A female voice. Light. Familiar. I froze. "Hey, baby." Ava's voice rang through the house. Surprise. I heard Ryan laugh. His real laugh. The one that made people believe he was this perfect, effortless guy with nothing to hide. I clenched the fridge handle so hard my knuckles turned white. Footsteps. Then her voice again. "Is Ethan here?" Ryan hesitated. Just for a second. "Yeah, he's in the kitchen." I shut my eyes, took a slow breath, then turned around just as Ava walked in, smiling bright, her arms already open for a hug. I forced a smile. Let her hug me. Let her touch me like I wasn't the one touching her boyfriend behind her back. When she pulled away, she grinned. "Ryan's been telling me how much fun it's been having you here." I glanced at Ryan. He was watching me too closely, his expression unreadable. I nodded. "Yeah, it's been interesting." Ava laughed, completely unaware. "Well, I figured since it's your last night here, we should all do something fun. Maybe drinks? Movie night." My stomach twisted. My last night. Ryan hadn't mentioned that. Ryan hadn't mentioned anything. I swallowed. "Yeah, sure." Ava beamed, linking her arm through Ryan's. Perfect. And I watched as he let her. As if just hours ago, he hadn't been in my bed, hadn't touched me like he needed me. I felt sick, and suddenly I knew I couldn't do this anymore. That night, I packed my bags. I didn't wait for Ryan to sneak into my room. Didn't wait for him to make more excuses, to touch me like he meant it, but walk away like it never happened. I was done being a secret. I had just zipped up my suitcase when there was a knock at my door. Ryan, of course. I exhaled. "It's open." He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. His eyes immediately flicked to my suitcase. "You're leaving tonight?" His voice was low, careful. I nodded. "Yeah." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "You weren't even going to tell me?" I let out a bitter laugh. What was there to tell Ryan? He exhaled hard, running a hand through his hair. "Ethan?" "No." I cut him off. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to be mad. I was never staying. And you were never going to choose me." His silence was my answer. I grabbed my bag and moved past him. But just as I reached the door, he caught my wrist. For a moment, I let myself feel it. The warmth of his skin, the hesitation in his grip, the part of him that wanted to ask me to stay but never would. Then I pulled away. And this time, I didn't look back.